Hello, I'd like to welcome you to the Steps to Success Note-Taking 101. And I know this is not going to be the most exciting topic because many of you have already taken notes already in your time, but we're going to look at specifically notes that you will take in clinical classes and also in labs. My name is Dr. Shmaefsky. I go by Dr. S, and I've been doing the Note-Taking 101 for the Steps of Success for a long time now, and I'm a professor of environmental sciences and also the chair of the Institutional Review Board. So if any of you get involved in any student research, probably you'll be coming to me to get advice about human subject research. Now, before I go into my presentation, something very important is that when you start thinking about notes, particularly in a clinical setting, notes must make sense, and that's going to be a warning and also a problem that we have too, is that these are going to be the notes that you're going to refer to for studying and for tests. So the hints I'm going to give you are going to hopefully help you with taking good notes that you can use to study and also eventually for board exams. Now, before I go telling you how to take notes and being, acting like an expert and all of that, I do have a confession to make. Is that when I was in college, I was very much sitting in the same situation as you were. I was actually going into X-ray technology at the time at a hospital-based program that was associated with the community college, and I was first generation at college. My family didn't speak English fluently at home, and I know it was a very difficult thing for me to even get through high school as much as now thinking about going to college, and particularly a technical program like radiology. So my note-taking skills weren't great, and I didn't have a program like Steps to Success to help me. So I kind of learned by sheer determination and accident, also professors that helped me. And I learned that there is a style ultimately on how to take notes. And for me, too, college success was developed. I had to consciously work hard, particularly when going into clinical rounds and learning all the technical stuff and technical terms. And I really had to work at it. And plus, it requires effort and discipline, particularly when learning online, because some of your instruction might be virtual, just like the Steps of Success. And I didn't have to go through that, but I know in my own learning, eventually taking some online classes, it is a lot more work and it takes a lot more discipline. And note taking can still be done with pen and paper or on a Word doc while you're doing your online learning. So normally I'm used to doing this part in person, where I want you to ask yourself to evaluate your note-taking system. And so I would say, self, what do you do? Do any of you use complete sentences? And I can't ask you to raise your hands. I mean, you can, but I won't see it. And um, I guess what we're going to learn is that taking complete sentences in notes, particularly what you're going to call, I'm going to call your secondary notes, they're kind of a waste of time. And also when you're taking notes, it's very difficult to write exactly what the professor is saying. Two, do you use any form at all? That means you come prepared with a notebook that's designed for taking notes. And are your notes clear or confusing? Because I know I'd go home after a busy day and I had to work. I had to help with family. We had a family business and do other chores. My parents are handicapped, so I had to help with that too, on top of going to college and doing other things. So I know sometimes I wouldn't get around to looking at my notes till a couple of days later, and sometimes a week later, and I didn't understand them. And you should be able to understand the notes that you take. Do you capture main points and all the subpoints after you take your notes? And we're going to learn about this called rewriting your notes. And when you rewrite notes, do you streamline and use abbreviations or shortcuts to make the reading easier and simpler to study from, what we call bullet points? And the last thing is, do I rewrite my notes? So if any of you rewrite your notes, not just rewrites, but in a format that allows you to adjust your notes and use your book and other references to keep a good log of information that you could use again for testing and also for studying for board exams and even just studying before you go into a clinic. Okay, I've been teaching for about 300 years, and I know I spent a lot of time looking at students that don't take notes and students that also don't take appropriate notes or rewrite their notes, because I'll question them sometimes, particularly after a bad exam. How did you study? How did you use your notes? So why is note-taking important? First, it triggers basic learning processes and helps you to remember information. And it's usually put down in a way that you understand. As you rewrite notes, it's going to be important to write notes in a way that you study and that you learn. When you're taking notes, whether you're watching a video like this or listening to a lecture or going around learning procedures in a lab or in a clinical situation, it helps you to concentrate, either online in class or again in clinical observations. It also helps you to prepare for tests. Taking notes initially is a form of studying. Recording notes with a recorder of some type is really not as effective as actually writing, and we know that from the neurophysiological literature. And also when you rewrite notes, it reinforces, again, studying, because it is studying. So to say you don't have time studying, taking notes and rewriting notes is a way of studying. Some other reasons for taking notes, and this is something, again, that I learned in college on my own. I did not have somebody teaching me this. I mean, I didn't actually learn that there were methods till later on after I was teaching my students how to take notes. So your notes are often valuable clues of what the instructor thinks is important, because particularly in allied health classes, and medical classes, what you're learning from the instructor is probably more current than the book. It's specific to what that instructor wants you to get, and it's basically you got to learn what they're emphasizing, because that's what's going to be on the test. Your notes contain information could also be found nowhere else, not even the web sometimes, and it's the way your instructors want you to know it. They can give you current information that they've learned from their own experiences that are pertinent to certain situations. And also when you take notes, it helps you recall particularly any observations that you've done. When I was taking x-rays, I always kept a little black notebook that I would stick in my pocket. And any time I was learning from another person on taking x-rays, or when I was doing x-rays, I would always keep notes later on for not only for tests, but for when I had to do that x-ray again. So it was a great source of reminding me what's going on, particularly in recalling things during a fast-paced, rapidly going situation. So what are some guidelines to start you with for note taking? And this is to be very important when you're online, particularly listening to videos, because it gets kind of monotonous and dull and you can look for other things to do. So when you're taking notes, again, it's a way to concentrate on lecture, clinical observations, or reading material in general. Or what I'm showing here is a video. So it helps you to concentrate. And one thing that's important is you have to be there. You really need to be there when you're listening to a lecture or a video or a demonstration or lab instructions of some type. Your mind should not wander. And I know I had lots of things going on, taking care of family, worrying about paying bills and stuff. And if I concentrated on other things besides the lecture while a lecture or a clinical observation was going on, it didn't help me. And my success to getting my family out of what we were living in and myself to become a better person and have a career better than I was looking at without going to x-ray program was I needed to learn this material and do well. So I knew by focusing on other problems, no matter how big those problems were, it didn't help me in class. And it didn't help solve that problem either. So please be an active learner. And I'm not going to mention this over and over again. So taking notes is important even with online instruction and even when you have PowerPoints, because PowerPoints are not always appropriate or consistent with the way a professor lectures. And sometimes it's lacking information. Sometimes PowerPoints have too much information. And again, organize original notes into some type of logical form. That means be prepared to take initial notes in a way that you can revise them on that sheet of paper and be able to recall things so when you rewrite your notes, you know what's going on later. And take notes consistently. I was bad at taking notes inconsistently between classes, not having an organization to where I took my notes and where I wrote my notes. And also, I came from a family that we had 5 languages, 3 major languages that we used around the house. And I would sometimes write pidgin language. I would use other words in place of English words when I was taking notes and couldn't think of some other word to use in my notes. And when I look at my notes now, it's horrible to look at, because I don't understand them. And I can't believe I've kept some of my notes for such a long period of time. Some other note-taking guidelines is be selective when you're taking notes. Don't try to write everything. I mean, do write stuff down, but try to pay attention to what the important points are. And try to be brief with your writing. Write down major points if you can, or if you can underline or emphasize major points. And also, and this is a problem I have, write legibly. I could write illegibly in 4 different languages, and that doesn't help me sometimes. So I would block print. I know it slows things down, but it really helps you to go back later and say, and not have to question yourself, what the heck did I write? And forget about spelling and grammar when you're initially taking notes. A lot of times students interrupt a lecture or interrupt other students, I should say, students next to them when I'm lecturing, because they can't spell a word, or they don't, they are trying to put correct grammar into a sentence or something like that. And it really throws off me, because I'm saying, why are you talking? And also the other student interrupts with their note taking. So just don't worry about spelling or grammar. Worry about that later. I mean, you have a textbook. You could also ask the professor questions about that, how to spell a word, or it might even be on a PowerPoint. So your initial notes, you can't write everything, but try to get as much information that's important as possible. And again, I'm going to say, once you take initial notes, don't rely on those for your studying. Rewrite those notes, okay, handwritten or electronic, in a way that you understand the information. And remember, when you're note taking, an average person talks much faster than you can key in or type or write in. So try to pay attention to major points and learn the instructor, learn when they use a board, and learn how they emphasize information so that your note taking is going to be efficient and effective. And again, that takes practice. And actually, I learned how to do that real well taking journalism classes and interviewing people and not being able to ask them, could you repeat yourself, clarify this or that? I have to be quick and be able later, literally immediately, to go back and rewrite those in a way that I don't get in trouble when I publish that information. So to review some of these points, when you look at your initial notes, what are some points to consider in class or in clinicals when you come in prepared to take notes? And again, when you come in prepared, be an active listener. Be aware of what's going on. And there's some hints I'm going to give you to just know what's coming up in that lecture. So once you get to lecture, you should listen and read actively if something is being written on a board or being discussed. And what that means is being present, knowing ahead what's going on. When I was learning journalism, the first thing I taught, and to be able to be an active listener or an active reader when I was looking at something that was written or posted during an interview, that meant that I was prepared. I researched the person, I knew what was going on. I knew what the topic was going to be, and this is where your syllabus and your book comes in. Read your book ahead of time before a lecture or a lab, and know what you're getting into. Maybe review some of the terminology so you are prepared to learn that topic. So be prepared. And again, this is why we write syllabi, so that you can know what's going on before you get to that lecture. And be open-minded, particularly about points that you might disagree about in class. Because once we disagree with something, um, it takes our mind off what is being said. So, and don't let your mind argue and interfere with the note taking. So if there's something that a professor says and it kind of sounds kind of funny to you, don't argue to yourself and go, man, I can't believe they said that. Raise your hand, and that's right down here, and ask questions if it's appropriate. And also, if something is interfering with your note taking, like the professor's talking too fast, or you wish they put a word on a board, or they're not consistent with a PowerPoint, ask the question. We are open to answering questions. We don't avoid questions. And this helps with initial notes. But again, listen actively. Be open-minded. You're there to learn. And later on, you can raise questions about certain points or points that you missed or thought you misunderstood. Darn, I didn't know note-taking was this complicated so far. So anyway, some other hints for your initial lecture notes is develop and use a standard form. And what that means, have a book available that is usually large. That's not possible sometimes when you're in clinical or lab situations. You can keep a small book, but develop a note-taking method that includes streamlining, abbreviations, keeping margins, and also having a highlighter or something to underline notes as you're taking them if there's points you don't understand. And for lecture type situations, or even like now when you're sitting in front of a computer, type into something or write on something that's large enough, again, to leave space to alter your notes and modify your notes and put points of classification. But overall, the thing I'm going to stress the most is that after you're done with your initial notes, write your initial notes in a way that you can redo your notes after the lecture. And that doesn't mean just modify the notes you have now. Literally rewrite them that you took, those initial notes, rewrite those notes you took, and make sure that they're in a fashion that you could study from later. And what I mean by rewritten notes, think about the back chapter of a book. It's the end of every chapter of a textbook. It has terms, it has summaries, it has bullet points of what you're supposed to learn. It talks about learning outcomes and even gives you questions. And this is something you can do to yourself and rewrite notes. You could ask yourself questions that you think might be on a test. And this, again, we're going to learn that there are some time management strategies you could use to do this. Because rewriting notes and taking notes initially in a systematic fashion is studying. And I knew when I was in college, particularly earlier in college, and even throughout college, I always worked and for a lot of times took care of family members. So I always thought, man, I have no time to study. But as I went along, I learned that my my notes were an important part of studying, as far as taking notes, being alert in class, and eventually rewriting my notes to make them neater and easier to study from. Now, some additional hints when you're in your initial note taking is listen for a lot of cues as to important points. And usually we learn our professors very well, like they wore the same pair of pants for the same time, they have a dirt mark on their face, there's cabbage in their teeth, whatever. But learn how your professor conveys information. And this should be done within the first 2 weeks of class to help you hone in on what's important when things really start rolling in class or you get into laboratory or clinical settings. So listen for cues, usually like when a professor makes a transition from one point to another. So sometimes they'll repeat certain times, they'll emphasize by points, by changes in their voice, inflections. They may enumerate, that means give something a number. They may even write on the board. So learn when your professor is saying something that is valuable. And some professors will say this is important, and some professors will write on the board. Some will again give you subtle hints of what they think is important during lecturing. And some professors tell a story, and you have to learn to ask the question, is that story, going to be on a test? Don't say it's important, because obviously they're saying it's important to them, but say, is this testable material? And that gives you a clue to what's going to be on a test, and and should that be in your notes, particularly in your rewrite notes later on. Now, when it comes to board work, whether it's whiteboard or online, which I'm not using right now, well, similar, something like that, or whether it's on an actual board or a tablet or whatever, is write down everything a professor puts on a board. And that means charts, pictures, scribble, whatever. Because when we do that, it's very important. That means we're emphasizing that point, and probably we're going to test on it, or we think you need to know it in general, and probably for the rest of your life. Be careful with PowerPoint slides, because sometimes we just use the PowerPoint slides the way they are, and most professors make PowerPoint slides available to you. So don't write something down that you have access to. And you could always ask the professor to post the PowerPoints on D2L, which most of us do anyway. And sometimes professors just post their own notes, which is important to use too. So be careful about, again, board work and PowerPoints in particular, okay? But use PowerPoints as a way, particularly for spelling and for words that you don't understand. Also, when you're taking notes, particularly from someone that talks quickly or if something's happening quickly, like a procedure, again, don't worry about grammar and don't worry about small connecting words like is, as, were, whatever. Eliminate a lot of words. Just write like you don't know English. I mean, that's how I used to write and probably still do. The people that edit my work just don't tell me that. So write in bullet points if you have to, but be careful not to eliminate important words. And if you're going to abbreviate, remember your abbreviations. The fields we're going into are very ripe in abbreviations, but sometimes we forget them. So write in a streamlined fashion, and that helps a lot with speeding up note taking. If you can't do that and are just very good at writing fast, just write fast, but make sure again it's readable and neat later on. Now, the most important part of this talk, probably, that doesn't mean ignore the beginning part, um, is to make time to rewrite notes. And one thing I've learned to do as a student, because I had a lot going on when I was going through college, okay, just like you guys do. And college was kind of difficult for me. I really had to put twice as much time into it as everybody else. And plus, my English comprehension was not the greatest. Okay, particularly reading was very torturous for me, and particularly the sciences with all these large words, you know. So the way I found time to study was I made use of bathrooms. Now, in a house at the time that had three generations living in it and one toilet, that was not probably a good idea because someone would always be banging on the door saying, "Get the heck out of there." But I found time to rewrite notes. And that to me was a great study attempt and study skill. So when I started taking my initial notes and learned to start rewriting them in a neater way and that's why I did it, so my notes were neater and more organized, that to me was studying. Just sitting down, especially when you're tired and just reading, is not a way of studying. It's very ineffective. Now, if you read your notes aloud, sometimes that helps because the more you involve body activities, that means looking and saying something, looking and writing it, using motor skills, helps with learning, believe it or not. It gives you a multisensual learning. And, um, and believe it or not, again, just reading straight through without questioning yourself, without taking breaks, without rereading, is not studying. So if you just read through notes quickly and also don't have a method of reading through notes, what we call streamlining, that's not going to be effective. So when you think about time management, find time. Bathroom time was my time, and even today, I have a very well Wi-Fi bathroom with, that I sit and do incredible work, multitasking. The family doesn't approve of it, but I think it's effective. So for the Cornell method, the first step is to come to class prepared, or to wherever you go and prepared. We're going to take notes and even sitting in front of a darn computer. And what you can have is a loose leaf notebook, usually 8.5 by 11, or a formatted Word document, which I'm going to leave you with examples with. You can download online that you can write on. For a paper book, loose leaf helps. You can take pages in and out, but an initial book for lectures. So use the Cornell setup for initial note taking, where you have a main body that you take your notes in, and then you're going to see margins and spaces where you can then fix up those notes later for your rewrite. But again, be prepared. And guys, the last time I checked the cost of books is you can go to dollar store and get lots and lots of books for real cheap that you can easily organize into Cornell style, or use the margins of that book. So the important consideration here is to be prepared. Again, be prepared to learn and be prepared to write in a organized manner. So your initial notes don't have to look like this, but it would be cool if you can take notes like this. But this is what your rewritten notes format should look like. You should have an area in where you take your initial notes and rewrite them in an abbreviated fashion. You should have a part that you can put key ideas. You could put notes here that of things that you don't understand initially. Down here, you can put summaries. That means, or test questions for yourself on what you need to study from those notes. And don't try to cram a whole lecture, into this little spot. This is to be outlined and chunked and organized in, a way that you can study, that is rational and breaks up the lecture into bits and pieces, what we call chunks that you can study. So keep something like this. And I would also, because I used to not label my notes and lose track of them, is label the topics, label the date, because that gives you a clue of when you learn something in what order and what goes together. So the Cornell notes, particular rewritten notes, are a way that you can streamline your studying, and it leaves room to put points where you can say, this is what I don't know, this is what I know, and it helps you to study what you don't know. And this is very important when using your rewrite notes. But set up your notes in a way in your first step that allows you to study efficiently. So second step, once you have this organized notebook, rewrite your notes. Again, in like a bullet form, because that's how we learn. That's how your brain learns. It's called chunks. Put any cues that will help you study, any keywords, particularly words you need to spell, any questions that you have about the material, or any main ideas. So this is a space that if you can see color, I know I'm partially have chromatic aberration, so for me to use different color markers doesn't work, but you can use markers like in colors that say like red means I don't know this stuff, green I know this stuff, and mark up your rewritten notes so you're not studying what you know, and so that you're also studying main ideas, and that you're answering your own questions about that topic. Down here again, you can in your own words summarize what's going on, or you could again put questions. However you want to use this notebook is fine with you, but the main thing is that these should be the notes that you just sit down and study, or if you're really crazy, rewrite again. And then these are all areas here that you use to reinforce that material later on. And again, streamline your learning. Make your learning effective and efficient. Now the third step, and one warning about the third step, as you're taking notes, you should always start rewriting those no more than a couple of days after those notes are taken, and put them in your Cornell rewritten notes in the format that I mentioned earlier in step 2. This allows you to do this bits and pieces at a time, so as the semester goes on, you don't have a buildup of stuff that you have to put into rewritten notes. And again, when you study little pieces at a time, over time, that really helps to reinforce. And then once you're ready for a test, you have all these rewritten notes that you've done ahead of time, and you can go through them and review them and even use them to cram. You're not rewriting while you're studying, particularly cramming. So if you're going to cram, your notes should have already been rewritten from previous lectures. So this third step allows you now to look at your rewritten notes, read through them, make sure it's legible and reduced, and now you have a tool for studying in your rewritten notes. And again, your rewritten notes should look like the back of a textbook. It's chapters. Each chapter of a textbook, again, and even parts of the introductory piece of a chapter of a textbook, uses Cornell Method to summarize the important information. And these are how your notes should work. This is a survival skill. And believe me, I still take classes every now and then. And I do Cornell note taking because it does help me, particularly when I'm teaching full load, doing other things of professional work, and also trying to take a class to continue my education. So successful Cornell notes should be in like an outline form if that's how you work. It has top main sentences, main points, titles. I use bullet points because that's the way my brain works best. You could even take stuff and put it into flowcharts or diagrams, and if any flowcharts or diagrams or images were used as study during lecture, I would include those. I like looking at flowcharts and diagrams. I learn well from pictures. And also make sure that when you're rewriting that you have margin notes and highlighting of some type to study from, and use listing. That means for things that are done in steps, don't write steps in paragraph form. Put them in step form. Or you could flowchart it too, or combine the two. Have some redundancy to it, repetition, that will help you to study. So rewritten notes are streamlined. And again, they act as an important study too, that the notes are brief and accurate and comprehensive, and particularly reflect the way that you learn and the way that you study in general. And this is why you shouldn't use other people's notes. Use your own. You could always have other people critique your notes, and that's fine. Or you could look at other people's notes and say, hey man, I missed that. So this is normally my time to ask if you have any questions and to reiterate some major points. I just want you to think, what did you learn? And what did you take away from this? And how you can apply this? Because particularly, again, when you're learning online, when you're learning in lab situations, clinical situations, it'll be a much more difficult environment to take notes. But you really should. And if you are going to record notes, if you're allowed, I would take those recorded notes, write them in an initial form, and then do your Cornell format as a rewrite. Because, guys, studying from listening to a lecture is not effective. Believe me, when I was taking, sometimes when I was doing interviews of people, when I was taking journalism classes, I recorded. Because sometimes my English comprehension was not great. And sometimes I didn't understand someone's accent, so I had to listen to it over and over again. But I always did written notes with that. So hopefully what you learned is rewrite. Rewrite for the way that you learn. And studying is rewriting. Reading through stuff last minute when you're tired only once through is not studying. Looking at images, flowcharts is studying. Having organization is studying. Finding the time to do it, to study, to rewrite your notes is important. So, it takes discipline. And again, it does take hard work. But when you start finding a pattern to note taking, it does give you an easier way to study and a better way to manage your time. And thank you for your time. And I appreciate your participation today. And hopefully you stayed up from all of this and took some notes.